everyone, this is the gorgeous GareBear.
And this is the amazing AlliCat. And you're here because you're watching What in the World? Oh no, AlliCat! Our last few episodes have been about such academic and dry topics. I'm afraid that our audience is no longer having any fun.
Oh, fear not, GareBear. For I have a plan, and I know exactly who to call. Magic Power! Oh, don't worry. I, Amethyst Star Child of Rigel, am here to set your mind at ease and help add a little more gaiety into this video.
It can happen!
If only you believe.
As most of us are aware, magic is spectacular.
In more ways than one.
Yeah. This episode is strictly about magic in the sense of mysterious forces that are not explained by science within the world of the narrative.
So that means no mutants and no alien technology. And because we already kind of did an episode on it, no direct acts of a deity either. Furthermore, no magic is metaphor, at least not completely.
Magic should really affect the plot, not just be an accessory.
I mean, if magic does work metaphorically to describe a character's journey or to offer up some commentary on real life, then great, but it should actually have some influence within the story. So, even with these criteria, magic as a world-building concept can still be really hard to pin down or define, and that's because when you get down to it, magic is all about defying rational explanation.
But we won't hesitate to try!
With math!
Yeah! Wait.
You can typically rate the involvement of magic in a story using a few different metrics. A few of them apply for all aspects of world building, like effect on plot and overall presence. But magic is unique in that it can be either incredibly defined or incredibly undefined, and still manage to work.
But that sort of depends on another important factor. So much like the spectrum of political importance from our second episode, this is something you can use to gauge it.
We like to call it the magical scatterplot.
Or the scatterplot of magic.
Or the magical scatterplot of magic.
It's a scatterplot, we get the idea. First, we have the x-axis, which determines how defined your magic is.
The y-axis is about involvement and importance to the narrative.
And if you start plotting all of your favorite worlds, you get something that looks like a scatterplot. See a trend here?
Let's take a look at an example. Something like Cinderella. The one bit of actual magic in the story is the fairy godmother showing up and giving Cinderella a makeover so that she can go and get her man or whatever. We never ask ourselves how the fairy godmother came to get her magic, or what goes into her wand movements and spell words, or why the spell ends at midnight. But we don't need to. The magic doesn't need that much definition because its only function is to solve one problem and give the story a kick into the next bit.
Versus something like Harry Potter, where the magic is richly detailed. You need a wand that you have to move in a particular fashion and correctly pronounce specific words. Potions have specific recipes, and if you don't do it right, it can backfire in all sorts of ways. And most importantly, magic factors into almost every problem or solution in the story.
Just for funsies, let's switch the X value of Harry Potter and Cinderella. What would happen?
Well, Cinderella's interaction with magic would still be limited to that one moment as per its Y value, but imagine if the fairy godmother wasn't singing bibbidi bobbidi boo, but was actually rattling off the precautions of transfiguration. First you must focus, for if you don't then you risk getting stuck mid-transformation. Waving your wand in an incorrect way will result in morphological instability.
Meanwhile, Harry Potter would still have magic being critical to how everything happens, but none of it would be detailed.
How come wands don't work sometimes?
Reasons!
Is it Leviosa or Leviosa?
Meh.
Why is Voldemort still alive?
Ha! Doesn't matter.
Now, it's not that outliers in the scatterplot trend can't happen.
For example, the Indiana Jones movies have several loosely defined magical artifacts that play a large part, especially in each movie's climax.
And Neon Genesis Evangelion involves a rather muddy system of magical practices that are key to driving the story's events.
But that's somewhat up to interpretation.
Some works, like Evangelion, can blur the lines between science and magic by having, say, logic-defying monstrosities, and occult rituals that turn every living soul into orange juice.
But at the same time apply cybernetics to said monstrosities and trying to quantify said rituals. Sometimes, the explanations involved can get very detailed, but whether or not it counts as explaining the magic or science attempting to explain the magic can put its X value very low or very high.
The limit of how far something in a story can be considered magical can be summed up in this corollary to Clarke's third law of science fiction. Say it with me, class. Sufficiently analyzed magic is indistinguishable from science. At a certain point, once you've explained the magic thoroughly enough, it effectively ceases to be magic.
And thus you have our X-axis limit.
Where a work lies on the scatter plot can also be affected by its medium or genre. Video games that involve magical abilities need to have a more defined magic system so that the player knows how to use it, and more importantly, so that the game itself can crunch the numbers.
Many stories will actually fall back on magic systems that have already been codified in other works. They'll just take these pre-existing systems and then modify them slightly.
And most of these systems can be defined by answering 3 basic questions, and anyone creating such a system should be able to answer them.
So prepare yourself for Magic System Clarification! Whether or not it gets explained much in the narrative, this is something that every creator should know before they start dealing with supernatural forces. What is the source of the magic?
Sometimes it's the nature of the being that enables magic powers, channeling one's own spirit or chi or whatever inner essence is deemed important. Sometimes it's even a physical essence, like with blood magic.
Sometimes some kind of external help is needed to bring out said power. You see this a lot in video games, where characters must replenish their magic by drinking a potion. When it comes to potions, mana, and other magical fuel, how much power comes from the substance and how much comes from the practitioner varies between settings.
And at its most pure, all you really need is to be a magical being. Simply being an elf means they can do magic. Simply being a wizard, being a White Walker. Magic could also be some kind of ambient energy in the universe, intangible, yet nevertheless felt and used by the characters.
In their own right, magical items are hardly new to audiences. Whether you're dealing with magic rings, magic makeup, magic swords, or magic etc., enchanted items can pack just as powerful a punch as anything intrinsic.
This one is obviously important. How can the characters actually make the magic happen? Thankfully, tabletop RPGs have already laid the groundwork for us to break it up into 3 major methods.
First, physical components. This can mean locations, movements, and of course, objects.
Magic hinging on physical implementation makes plot centering on journeys and MacGuffins easy to facilitate. Want to destroy the One Ring? Mount Doom is the only place you can.
Want to unleash the water dragon jutsu? Do all of the hand seals, or it won't work.
Want to make a polyjuice potion? Your final ingredient better be from the correct species. Verbal components are things that must be vocalized to make the magic happen. The degree to which the incantations are made up can vary greatly, as can their complexity.
Depending on what suits the setting, you can get anything from completely meaningless but memorable words like bippity boppity boo to huge speeches delivered in a whole other magical language.
And the words don't even have to be made up, but sometimes they need to be sung, or repeated 3 times, or shouted dramatically!
Wait, when is that a requirement?
I don't know, but it seems to happen often enough.
Last is the mental component, which involves focusing on the magic in order to make it work. This can be intense concentration or simple will, but it means that the character has to actively acknowledge or concentrate on what they need to do in order to make the magic happen.
And that's the 3. You usually won't see them in isolation. Some combination will be required for any given magical act. It's highly unusual to only have 1 or 2 of them.
And it's even more unusual to have none of them. In this scenario, the magic is still there and exists and can happen, but the characters can't control it. And in that scenario, you usually get non-character type things like enchanted geography or another dimension.
Think of how boring a story would be if every conflict was solved just by magicking it. We call that Deus Ex Machina.
Think of any story with a nice, neat, plot-tailored magical solution that your characters don't earn themselves at all.
Wouldn't be much of a story, would it?
So, to make it so that you do have a story, your magic needs to have limits on what it can and can't do.
One way narratives do this is by categorizing magic into certain schools and deciding what their characters can access and when. Common to video games and other media is limiting magical abilities by class or job.
In fact, divvying up magical abilities by things like classical elements, morality, or other opposing concepts is a common and easy way to limit the magical abilities of all characters in a world with consistency. Another way is to make it so magic isn't able to solve personal problems.
Wait, so magic has all these possibilities, but it has all these limits?
It's not really as complicated as you think. You can get really creative with it still.
But as with everything, it helps to know what to avoid.
And what to embrace. Do try to keep your definition importance ratio. The scatter plot tends to fall the way it does for a reason. If your magic is super important to your story, it should also be well defined, unless you have a very good reason for doing otherwise.
Don't allow the magic to just do anything as the plot demands. If the audience finds itself asking, why don't they just magic it, and the story can't come up with a decent answer, then there's a problem. It can wear down the cohesiveness of the plot, not to mention it nullifies the stakes by making everything instantly solvable. It's one thing to have the occasional miracle, but if the whole plot runs on Deus Ex Machina, you won't keep your audience for very long.
Do give the magic some stakes, like potential to backfire, a risk of self-harm, social ramifications, a deep personal cost, or make it incredibly rare. If the magic really is special, it should have some special stakes, and it can even be the source of the story's main conflict if you want.
Don't fall into the same old magic systems we all know and love unless you have a very good reason or are doing something different with it. Granted, any world-building copy pasta is frowned upon, but magic is especially susceptible because it is often so iconic, yet is easily generalized.
Do embrace the possibility of allegory and metaphor. The beauty of magic is that it can stand in for all sorts of concepts, and since it's often the most dramatic difference from real life in a fictional world, the concept that it stands in for can be just as elaborate.
Don't make magic a mere accessory to your story, albeit a flashy one. It should affect your characters just like every other world-building element. After all, they live here! When it comes down to it, magic is a tool, and the kinds of tools available to a society determine its worldview and its capabilities.
Of course, magic is more than just a tool.
It can be a very special way of dealing with the unknown, or exploring the human condition, or getting rid of your enemies.
Or your friends.
Yes! 5th episode, end of season 1.
If you guys haven't checked out the rest of the season, what are you waiting for? Go back and do that, and then subscribe so you don't miss any of the future ones.
And if you want to start a discussion about your favorite magic systems and how they work, leave a comment or hit up our social media.
And then next up is going to be another analysis, so stay tuned for that, and in the meantime, stay curious.
And stay creative.